Mr. Ream, how did you first become interested in the topics you discussed at the panel this morning?
Well, I could go back to when I was in K through 12 education. I thought I had an outstanding civics teacher and some really good history teachers in junior high and high school, and got interested in the American founding. And I also, then when I went to college at Vanderbilt University, I became a major in American history. Mm-hmm. So I learned a lot more there about the American founding, and I also always had an affinity for President Calvin Coolidge. Partly his religious heritage was as a congregational member of a congregational church. My father was a congregational minister, mm-hmm. So I learned what I could about Coolidge in the days prior to Amity Shlaes writing a great biography of him.
What do you think is the most important idea or ideal about the Founding Fathers that you would hope the audience would walk away with today?
Yeah, I hope they understood from our panel, which had 4 outstanding speakers, that the American Revolution could have gone the way of the French Revolution, meaning that we could have had kind of revolt after revolt, we could have had more violence following our rebellion, but our framers, our founding fathers, really were focused on how do you have a revolution, a rebellion for independence, while also maintaining order and asserting rights that they felt they had as Englishmen. Mm-hmm. So they had, as another panelist said, they had the objective in mind before they chose the means of rebellion, their objective being to form a government that would protect individual rights.
What do you think is most misunderstood about the American founding?
Well, probably the most misunderstood thing is that they were seeking to create kind of a new world experiment, a utopian experiment, rather than that they were really trying to assert rights that they felt they had as Englishmen and as really children of God. I think there's a misunderstanding that they were somehow not a religious people, when many of them settlers had come here from England and from Europe seeking religious freedom, the right to worship God as they chose. So there is this religious and moral underpinning to our founding that's very important and is often neglected as well.
Were there any topics or points that you didn't get the chance to talk about during the panel that you'd like to expand on now?
Well, I think we could have focused a little more on this idea that, but which we touched on, but that people like George Washington and others were very quick to put down something like the Whiskey Rebellion. They really wanted to maintain ordered liberty in our society. We could have dug a little deeper into that perhaps. We touched on it. I thought Professor William Allen gave a great presentation. Could have been a session all by itself about George III, mm-hmm. the monarch of England, who we were issuing this Declaration of Independence from. That he was, in many ways, as Professor Allen outlined, his beliefs weren't too far away from what the founders believed, that you need a government of measures and law and not a government of men, that law is something to be discovered, not made up. Congress and Parliament may pass legislation, but law is something more fundamental that you must discover. So we could have hit on those themes a little more, perhaps.
Do you think King George III is mischaracterized by most of today's society?
Well, I think historically, the caricature of him is almost as a madman who wouldn't relent for anything that the colonists want, and many people could rightly question his decision to go to war. It was hotly debated in Parliament, but ultimately those who wanted to punish the colonies and not repeal the various acts that the colonists were upset with prevailed in the debates in Parliament. But based on newer work that's been done by historians and by Professor Allen and others and discoveries they've made, present George III as a much more thoughtful person and much more of someone who acted and behaved based on many of the same principles, like the supremacy of Parliament, that the framers were pushing.
Going back to one of the things you mentioned a few questions ago, can you elaborate on the kind of interaction between security and liberty in American society?
Yeah, there's, Benjamin Franklin talked about the tension that exists between the desire for safety and security on the one hand and the desire for liberty. People are too quick to want to sacrifice liberty in order to have security, and it's something we always have to guard about in our society. It's a tension really in our society there. I think what's interesting is to focus on, and I said this in my opening, was that here these colonies of 2.5 million people put into place a set of ideas that protected unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And by doing that, by limiting government, they unleashed what has been called the Great Enrichment, a tremendous amount of innovation, invention, prosperity that allowed this human flourishing. And we went from 2.5 million to almost 350 million people today. The beacon of liberty to the world, drawing people seeking opportunity, seeking religious freedom, seeking the rights that we guarantee under our system. It's a remarkable story, and it's one we have to keep teaching every generation, that we can get security, but we get it through our own human flourishing, our own pursuit of happiness, and should not expect government to provide it for us.
Do you think Calvin Coolidge's positions on the Constitution and the Declaration are still relevant today? And if so, what should the American people learn from those positions?
Great question, and they're definitely so relevant today. I mean, we're coming up on the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence in 2026. We need to all go back to Coolidge's Independence Day address, the anniversary of which he gave on July 5th in 1926, 150-year anniversary. Every American should read that document, and school children, whether in K through 12 or in higher education, should read it and have discussions of it, because Coolidge captured those ideas so well, that what our Declaration is all about, what it means to be an American. And we can't forget that. And it was President Reagan who said, freedom is just a generation away from extinction, and we don't pass it down through our DNA, through our bloodstream. We have to teach it to each generation. The Coolidge Foundation is doing that so effectively with your programs, and it's something we try to do at the Fund for American Studies, but it's something that's so vital. And Coolidge really understood our founding ideas, understood our Declaration of Independence and the values and the importance of what stood behind it, and so we can learn so much from him.
Finally, what do you admire most about Calvin Coolidge or his legacy?
Well, I admire very much his modesty, humility he had. I admire the policies he pursued, both as the governor of Massachusetts and as the President of the United States. A sign of that modesty was his decision not to run for re-election when he could have, following in the tradition somewhat of George Washington there. He believed in economy of government, did a lot to try to reduce spending and create fiscal responsibility in Washington, D.C. Those are all things that we can learn a lot from today, and things I truly admire about the man.